This is possibly the most important subject matter of the moment in the world of marketing communications, along with sustainability. And today's event is entitled Diversity, Quality and Inclusion. Why should we bother? I think it's pretty fair to say that agency land, and for that matter, client land, has made pretty good progress, particularly since the start of the century. Seems odd to be talking about the start of the century, isn't it? But yeah, in the last 21 years, we have seen a substantial development in marketing communications, and with more inclusion and more diversity within agencies. But if we look around the room today, and more broadly, we look around the membership of Pimento, and we look at the agency leaders in those organisations, we've got a long way to go. And truth is, attracting, particularly at the moment, retaining and developing a more diverse workforce is absolutely essential to future business growth and profitability. 14% of the UK's population is Black or Asian, but that's certainly not represented when you look at the agencies. And whilst there was obviously big differences between the South, the North, the East and West in terms of the availability of talent, I really do think we can do more to get more diversity into organisations. And I'm not just talking here about colour, I'm not just here talking about religious beliefs or background. I mean, there's a real need to get white working class people into agencies. It has for a very long time been a very middle class society. So this week we welcome Srabani Sen OBE, founder and CEO of Full Colour. They're a strategic D&I consultancy she established in 2019. And she has a very long and successful career in the not-for-profit sector, including 3 CEO roles. Srabani has also served on boards for nearly 30 years and is currently International Development Agency head of ActionAid UK. So we're really privileged to have somebody of her experience and also a refreshing way that she has approached this whole subject matter to really help organisations recognise not only the why or the how, but most importantly, how does one create environments in which we can attract and retain more diverse talent? So I'm really looking forward to what she has to say today. She has a short presentation. We're then going to open it up to conversation, and then we'll come back into the round, and hopefully all of you will have an opportunity to get involved. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over, if I may. Good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, great. Yeah, the sun's come back out again, and I'm looking forward to some decent weather to the end of this week after yesterday's miserable day. But no, things are all good.
Brilliant stuff. Well, there's clouds in the sky in front of me, but I will not take that as a sign. Thank you so much, Stephen, for inviting me to chat to you all today. Lovely to see so many people on the call, so thank you. Good to meet you. As Stephen said, my name is Srabani Sen, and I founded an agency called Full Colour about 18-19 months ago, following a very long leadership career in the not-for-profit sector. And I kind of remind you of that because that informs my approach to equality, diversity and inclusion. So if you're sitting there with any scintilla of nervousness that I'm going to tell you you're all bad people, then don't worry, I'm not, because that's not what I do with organisations. So a lot of equality, diversity and inclusion agencies start from an activist moral perspective as to why you should, as organisations, become more equal and diverse. And whilst I share that moral perspective, that's not my approach. So what I do is I work with organisations at a very strategic level to help organisations identify how becoming more inclusive, diverse and equal is relevant to their particular organisation and business. So I do a lot of work in the NGO sector, unsurprisingly, given my background. So just about to start work with UNICEF. I'm just just halfway through an enormous project for the entire NGO environment sector in England, looking at some of these issues, and a whole range of other kind of systems change projects that I'm doing with my team on these topics. But interestingly, and I think this is how I got to know Stephen, I've also begun to develop a client base in your world. So hopefully I know a little bit about your sector, though clearly not even a fraction as much as you know about your sector. That's unsurprising, really, isn't it? As Stephen says, I'm going to share a quick presentation with you. I'll be as quick as I can so that to maximize the time for questions. Oh, I don't know why I've suddenly opened my Word. That was not my intention at all. Just to kind of set the scene really for today. When we talk about issues around equality, diversity, inclusion, there's a really weird thing which seems to happen, is that everybody feels like they should know what we're talking about. In my experience, most people actually don't fully understand what the concepts of equality, diversity and inclusion are, but don't feel able to say, hang on a second, what do we mean? What does any of this mean? And so I'm just going to start by sharing a few definitions that we've developed at Full Colour. One of the challenges in working around equality, diversity and inclusion is that there are no what I would call industry standard definitions of the terms. But what I also find is that a lot of people misunderstand what the words mean. And you can't really develop a plan or a strategy or an approach to becoming more equal, diverse and inclusive unless everyone in your organisation has the shared understanding of what the words mean. So what does Full Colour use as those definitions? Well, diversity, everybody kind of gets that diversity is about having lots of different kinds of people as part of your organisation. So whether that is to do with class or ethnicity or gender or sexuality or disability, that kind of stuff, everyone kind of gets that. Unfortunately for most people, that's where people's definitions in their heads stop. And having lots of different kinds of people in your organisation isn't really meaningful unless that organisation is being that difference. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted, I'll tell you a secret, I'm brown. And one of the things that happen when you are different in any kind of way is you very, very quickly learn to assimilate to the mainstream of what that organisation is like. In fact, my parents actively taught me as a child how to assimilate. If people are coming into your organisations bringing difference with them, but then assimilating into the main way in which you work, that difference isn't worth anything to you, and those people are not being their true versions of themselves. So diversity isn't just about being able to count how many gay people you have, or how many women you have, or men you have, or people from Nigeria you have. That's not diversity. Diversity is actually being the difference that those people bring to your organisation. Inclusion is a way of working. If you ask vast majority of people what does the word inclusion mean, what they'll tell you is oh, it's all about belonging, and it's about being friendly and welcoming and valuing all those people who are joining you who are different. Yes, that's true, but it is a teeny, 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 tiny part of what inclusion properly is. Because if you're doing inclusion right, it should be hard. And if it feels easy, you're not doing inclusion. So inclusion is actually about looking at those differences that you have within your organisation and bringing them to the surface and bringing them to those spaces where you're problem solving, you're decision making, you're developing new ideas, you're developing strategy. That is inclusion. And for anybody who's on the call, who is on a leadership, in any kind of leadership role, whether that's at a team level or whether you lead your organisation, actually being able to bring difference and challenge into all of those spaces that I've just listed, whilst making those spaces psychologically safe enough for people to be able to share those differences and share that challenge. I'm telling you, it's tough. And if you do it now, you know it's tough. And if you don't do it now, it's probably because it is tough. Because holding that tension between all that challenge, and still making it a productive, creative place to be is not easy. Equality, again, if you ask people what the word equality means, as eggs is eggs, what they'll talk about is equality of opportunity. I started work gosh, more than 30 years ago, probably about 35, 36 years ago. Equal opportunities was the thing then. And the idea was, if you just make opportunities available to a wide range of people over time, your organizations will become more diverse. Well, that's been on the go for nearly 40 years as an approach. Has that worked? Don't think so. And for me, equality is not about equality of opportunity, although of course we should be trying to address those issues, and in questions we can talk about that if people have a question about that. But actually it's about how power works in your organizations. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all become anarchist, Marxist collectives, but there are lots of ways in which power works in organisations that have nothing to do with organisational structures like hierarchy that's needed in any kind of organisation, or expertise or experience, and valuing that expertise or experience. But we will all be familiar with organisations where attributes which have nothing to do with adding value to an organisation's way of thinking or working are where power sits. It could be to do with the length of time someone's worked with you, and that the more they've been with you, the more voice they have within the organisation. Classic thing with agencies, founder syndrome, the voice of the founder matters more than the voice of other people. Well, why? Other people might have good ideas too. So that's what the definitions are. One of the things I'm going to do now is spend a little bit of time talking about why should you bother with equality, diversity and inclusion? Why does it matter? And I'm going to start by showing you a little video, if I can find it, sharing sound, from some work that McKinsey have been doing over a course of a number of years.
When you look at diversity, is it now a buzzword to attract younger talent and millennial, or actually do companies really take it seriously?
It's very true that younger workers want to work in companies that reflect the environment they've been in school, the environment they have in a global world, but it is certainly not a millennials issue only. Most companies we find have employees right across the age, experience, and skills spectrum. And what the data shows is that companies that have more diverse leadership teams are more successful. And so the leading companies in our data sets are pursuing diversity because it's a business imperative and driving real business results. It may be helpful on recruiting, it may be the right thing to do, but it's the business imperative that's the dominant.
But do people get it? Because so we have examples of, for example, law firms that are not very diverse, and actually clients saying, well, I'll only give you the job if I have a diverse, group of people working for that. Is that the only way of getting people to change the way that they do business?
Well, I think there are three pieces. One is, first, you have to believe that there's an economic and business argument, and our research on the power of parity in terms of gender inclusion as well as diversity matters is very helpful in terms of demonstrating that high-performing companies in terms of profitability as well as total value creation are more diverse, and the difference between the most diverse companies and the least diverse companies is significant. Companies that are more diverse in terms of women and diverse profiles in decision-making roles are 21% more likely to be successful than those aren't. So it's a material difference with real bottom line impacts. You have to believe that and be able to develop a business case for your situation. Secondly, it is very clear that your supply chain, as well as many customers and consumers, care about this issue and are, as the client example you just gave, raising the issue with companies. But we shouldn't have to wait for our customers and consumers to move. We should be ahead of it. And then finally, measuring it, tracking and measuring the impacts so that you look at the right set of variables. The one variable that's common across all economies and sectors is, of course, gender. But after that, companies have to tailor a set of diverse criteria that fit their business. And we can talk about examples of companies that have done that.
Oh, hang on, let me just turn that off because that's not very helpful. Go away. Okay. That's better. A bit of stuff we didn't need that. So I'm going to go back to my slides then. So that the challenge I was set in terms of talking with you today was to think about, you know, why should we bother? Why should we bother with equality, diversity and inclusion? McKinsey is probably the best known, and I suspect that many of you on this call are here on this call because you already have a pre-existing interest in equality, diversity and inclusion. So you'll be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, McKinsey have been doing work over a large number of years around what are the actual financial benefits of equality, diversity and inclusion. So the research that the woman that McKinsey on that clip was talking about was related to that middle column, the 2017 column, but they've actually subsequently done another piece of research which they published last May, I think it was. So the data is from 2019, but the report came out in 2020. And what McKinsey have done is consistently, so they looked at the 2020 research, looked at 15 countries, 1,000 large companies, and consistently organizations that are gender diverse and ethnically diverse, quite frankly, make more money. I would be highly surprised if there's anybody on this call whose businesses don't want to make more money. So if you are even remotely interested in making more money, if you are even remotely interested in outperforming your competitors, you cannot ignore issues around diversity and inclusion, because you will be, if you are not addressing those issues, others will be overtaking you very, very quickly, if indeed they haven't done so already. There's also, I mean, if I wanted to collect all the reports that exist about the value of increased diversity, equality and inclusion, I could probably create 2 or 3 piles which are floor to ceiling high, with the amount of data that exists around the benefits, the financial benefits, which we've just talked about. Deloitte's have done quite a lot of work on financial benefits as well, but also what you will find is that organizations that are more equal and diverse and inclusive are much, much better at innovation. They're better at developing new products and services and doing so quickly. They're much better at adapting to changes within the market that they work within. The McKinsey report from last year talked about the fact that in their estimation, McKinsey's estimation, companies which are more equal and diverse and inclusive were much more likely to recover more quickly from the impact of the pandemic than companies that weren't. And there is just a strong body of evidence that companies that are more equal and diverse are better at innovation. There's also a shared load of evidence that companies that are more equal, diverse and inclusive are much better at decision making. I picked out a couple of them, or 2 or 3 examples there of data, but there's loads of data that companies just make better decisions. I love the top one, that basically you just make decisions faster with half the number of meetings. Who wouldn't like to cut half the number of meetings from their diary? I certainly would. So there's lots and lots of evidence about that. One thing though, I would really like to urge caution about. When I first start working with organizations and companies around these issues, normally, not always, but like I'm making up a figure now, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, they come to me because they want to become more diverse. And I point out to them, well, that's lovely. Joy, very, very happy to hear that. But diversity without inclusion, if you remember my definition of inclusion, which is harnessing the value of that diversity, bringing challenge and difference into decision making, into problem solving. If you don't have inclusion, then that diversity isn't worth anything to you. So all of these benefits of diversity isn't worth it unless the organization that is bringing diverse people to it changes within itself to become more inclusive. Just adding a layer of brown people to your organization is not going to help you. It might make you feel good when it relates to the moral case around diversity and inclusion, and as I say, I'm a big believer in the moral case for it, but you will not glean the business benefits if you don't become more inclusive along the way. So and why should you particularly be thinking about it? Well, I don't have a load of customers in your sector, but I do have a few customers in your sector. And what I'm told by my clients in the sector in which you inhabit is your customers are demanding it. You know, years gone by, the customers or potential customers wouldn't even have been asking you about equality, diversity and inclusion within your companies. Now, my understanding of your colleagues in the sector that I work alongside is far more customers and potential customers are asking organizations such as yours how you're addressing these issues. There's also a big societal shift. If part of your challenge as an organization is talent, in terms of attracting decent talent, younger staff, regardless of whether they have a particular protected characteristic, in other words, that it belonged to a particular group that is covered by equality legislation in this country, but younger people, regardless of what their own background are, expect it, because their values are very much driven by a belief in and a passion for equality, diversity and inclusion. So if you want to attract decent talent, you can't pretend equality, diversity and inclusion. I see a lot of companies doing stuff which looks terribly, terribly busy, but is very unmeaningful. If you're serious about attracting decent talent, particularly in the younger generation, you really need to address these issues actively and properly. But also, you won't be serving your clients. If your clients are, depending on the nature of your clients, they're going to be looking to be attracting more diverse customers, more diverse people to their own teams. So if you're to serve them, how can you serve them if you're not addressing those issues yourself? But also the issues are much, 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 much more visible. As I might have intimated by the fact that I told you that I've been in paid employment for 35 years, I'm not young. So I've seen movements like Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and those kind of things which have generated the level of profile that's happened over the past few years. I've seen them before. I've seen them come, and then I've seen them go. And the difference this time is they're not going. So if you're thinking, oh, it's just a cyclical thing, we'll have forgotten about this in a while, possibly. That definitely has happened in the past. It seems to be sticking this time. So I don't think that interest in created by issues, by movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter will go. But also the world in which we inhabit. When I started work 35, 36 years ago, we didn't have things like Glassdoor. We didn't have things like social media. That kind of point where what happens in an organization stays in the organization, and you might tell your friends and family what it's like to work in an organization, but nobody else will know. That isn't the world we live in now. So, you know, people will talk, and they will talk publicly about what kind of an organization you are to work within. So there are some real imperatives for you in terms of really addressing these things. And if you don't, this sort of thing happens. Now, I don't know if any of you remember the Dove campaign from, I think it was 2017, I want to say, is the Dove campaign, where they astonishingly had an advertising campaign, which I think was a social media based campaign rather than tele campaign or radio campaign, which said, use Dove products, and if you're black, you can become white. Way! And seemed to think that that would be a good idea. Astonishing. Now, there is no way on this planet that the agency that came up with that campaign would have got that campaign past its decision-making levels if people at a decision-making level were from some kind of diverse background. There's also no way on this planet that Dove would have accepted that campaign if they had sensible people from a diverse background in their decision-making forums. And if you think, oh yeah, but you know, that was about 4 or 5 years ago now, yeah, it wouldn't happen now. I mean, I remember TV campaigns during lockdown, like last year. There was I think it was like a kitchen kind of fitting company, you know, people that come and give you brand new kitchens, where they had an advert where there were like multiple families, and you'd see multiple families in kitchen situations, and the only black family on that campaign were arguing with each other. So that's not playing into any tropes about black people, is it? No, of course it isn't. And then what I found was, like, part way through the campaign, they changed what the black family were doing. And then I think they were doing something else. I think they were playing a board game or something, because clearly somebody had pointed out that the only aggressive family on that advert happened to be black, which of course speaks to the trope that all black people are aggressive. Again, those campaigns would not have made it through. So this kind of stuff is happening now. So one of the things I just wanted to share, and then I'll tackle one more topic, and then I promise I will stop to make as much time for questions as possible, is in the work that I do with organisations, and some of the organisations I work with are very, very large, like, you know, several thousand employees, and some of them might have a couple of hundred. So, you know, the range of organisations I work with is very, very broad. But there are some common mistakes I come across. And here are some of them. I'm not going to pull all of them out. I'll pull some of them out. So one of the things that I see a lot of is number 2. So what happens is there's this EDI box that gets created. It sits alongside the other stuff that you exist to do, and then it's kind of tacked on as a side of desk activity, and it's not made relevant to the central purpose for which organizations exist. The business benefits of equality, diversity, and inclusion link to why you exist as an organization. So there's something about how you really graft it on to the DNA of why you exist as an organization. There's something about number 6, which is, I mentioned before, is people are desperately chasing diversity and not recognizing that the reason people aren't joining you or aren't applying to for your roles is partly because of the organization that you are now and people not wanting to join you. So there's something about, you know, change yourself from within first and really grapple with that inclusion stuff, and then diversity will come. Another one is number 7. I see this a lot. 7 and 8 I see a lot because they're quite linked, which is people sit down and they have conversations or brainstorming. What should we do? What should we do? And they come up with some random kind of actions and initiatives or things that they could do, with no coordination, no understanding of what is it that the change that we're trying to achieve, and how do we come up with actions which are linked to the actual changes that our organization is trying to achieve. And the other thing I will just briefly touch on is number 10. So the classic things that happen in pretty much every organization that I work with is when I've arrived with them to them, what they've done is they've put out a call to their organisation to say, we want to do work on equality, diversity and inclusion. Who's interested in joining a working group? And then they pull together a working group of very enthusiastic and well-meaning volunteers with absolutely zero expertise in equality, diversity and inclusion. If you were going through a financial crisis in your organisation, would you put out a call to say, hello, we're going through this real financial crisis. We'd really be interested in volunteers to come and help us think about how we fix our financial crisis. You don't have to know anything about finance or business or anything that will get us out of the financial crisis, but do join us because we'd love to have a volunteer from your team. So come and join us. I mean, it's madness. It's madness. So I'm going to ask you now to do something a little bit counterintuitive. I'm going to ask you to turn your mics on so we can hear you. And without thinking about it too much, I would like you to call out some answers to me. Just yell at me. Well, yell politely, obviously, but just yell at me. What do you think's happening in this picture? Somebody tell me what's happening in this picture.
Celebration.
Celebration. Yep, celebration, yep. Anything else?
Reunion.
Reunion, yeah, reunion, yeah.
Family gathering.
Family gathering, yeah. Anything else?
They've got lanyards on, so it looks like a business meeting.
Could be a business meeting, yeah.
Good spot,
Conference.
Conference, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. So thank you, by the way, all good guesses. These women are rocket scientists. So India predated NASA by 2 years on their Mars orbital mission. So this is a group of women scientists who are celebrating their Mars orbital mission being successful. And these 3 women are actually part of the senior team, the senior leadership team that led that program. So obviously there was a range of leaders, and these people were some of the regional leaders. They have job titles I don't actually even understand, because I don't understand the scientific stuff that they were doing. And this is one of the challenges that I just want to leave you with thinking about, and I'm going to share another video with you around this, and that is about the topic of unconscious bias. So what I'm going to do is, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what unconscious bias is, because people I think it means that they're closet homophobes or closet racists, and therefore shy away from thinking about it because it feels far too uncomfortable to recognize that we might all have biases. So this is a little video which explains what unconscious biases are. Oh, hang on.
Your brain, by some accounts, receives roughly 11 million pieces of information each second, but your conscious brain is only able to process about 40. How do you handle all the rest? You handle it because you're really using 2 brains. Your conscious brain, which works with facts and data, has very little capacity and processes information slowly, and your unconscious brain, which is habit and intuition driven, has huge capacity and is really fast. One of your unconscious brain's best tricks is its ability to recognize patterns and use them to assign people and things to categories, allowing your unconscious brain to deal with all of the known, not dangerous issues, and leave only the few unknown or dangerous issues to your conscious brain. This allows us to recognize a pattern and act on it, rather than having to think about every interaction as if we were experiencing it for the first time. We can glance at that 4-legged animal and know if it's a wolf or a cocker spaniel. That recognition allows us to make assumptions about the animal facing us, that the wolf belongs to the wild animal category and is likely to be dangerous, or that the cocker spaniel is in the domestic dog category and not likely to be dangerous. The assumptions we make about these pattern groups are likely to be based on our own experiences, on information we have gained from our culture or background, or from the media we listen to or people we admire. Unfortunately, those assumptions are often wrong. When we categorize people, our brains apply 2 other tools. One is affinity bias, a hardwired preference to respond positively to people who look, sound, and act like ourselves. Brain imaging scans show that when people are shown images of faces that differ from their own, it activates in milliseconds activity in the part of the unconscious brain that alerts us to possible danger. This may reflect a survival tool left over from ancient times, when danger often came from those outside our immediate group. Today, however, this means the associations and biases are likely to be unconsciously activated every time when we come across a member of a group, even if we consciously reject group stereotypes. In addition to affinity bias, our unconscious brain categorizes people into groups and then connects those groups to our learned ideas or constructs about what is good or bad. Now, we've decided whether someone is like us or not, and whether they're good or not, all within milliseconds of meeting them. So, what can you do to manage your unconscious biases? You've already started by just learning about unconscious bias. Now, identify your own biases and address one at a time by building inclusive habits. Remember, if you do not intentionally, deliberately, and proactively include, you will unintentionally exclude.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a picture about what unconscious bias is. It doesn't actually make you a bad human being. And this is what I think it's really, really important to understand, because if people don't understand that, they shy away from trying to find out what their own biases are. I've got biases. I know. I've been tested. We've all got biases. It's part of the human condition. So there's something about actually, the more you can surface what those biases are, the more you can actively address them. And there are a ton of them. So that diagram, I'm not expecting, oh, hang on, strange things have happened. I'm not expecting you to be able to read all of that because it's a bit too small, but there are tons of biases that we all suffer from. That blind the way we think about things. So they talked about confirmation bias in that video. Confirmation bias is when you're looking for information to support what you already think. For example, groupthink is another example of unconscious bias, and people think groupthink is just everyone in the room is the same and therefore thinks the same, and that's definitely part of groupthink. But groupthink can also be driven by powerful personalities. So if you have a very powerful person, it could be your founder, it could be somebody who's got a particular series of expertise, and they dominate conversations, that is a form of groupthink, because what people are doing is they're aligning around the powerful person in the room. And that's why you get leadership advice that from people like Simon Sinek, who's a bit of a hero of mine. Some of you may have read some of his books. He talks about, one of his books is, I think, Leaders Always Lunch Last. Part of what he's talking about is power. It's like, how do you wield your power in a way where it's not getting in the way of other people? There's beauty bias. You know, we're much more likely to respond positively to people we find attractive. There's so many biases that affect us. So it's not just about sexuality or gender or ethnicity and so on. And it actively plays out. It plays out in recruitment. There's a couple of examples there of research. I remember a research which isn't captured on that slide, reading about where they were tracking the eye movements of people reading a bunch of CVs. And these people were completely unaware that when they were reading CVs that had an ethnic sounding name, their eyes were scanning and stopping on information which was kind of negative information about that candidate. And when they were reading CVs of white sounding candidates, their eyes were stopping on positive information about that candidate. Did these people reading these CVs know that? No, they didn't. Why? Because their biases were unconscious. That's why we have to do work to try and actively and independently, that's why I'm a big fan of tests, to kind of surface what some of our biases might be. And, you know, here are examples. There's evidence around biases showing up when you're doing performance reviews and that kind of stuff. I won't dwell on that slide in the interest of time. And one of the exercises I do, which we won't have time to do today, is I give some examples of ways in which you might spot whether or not there is unconscious bias or inequality at play in your organisation. And you've got some examples there. I mean, if you're based in London and you walk into your office and your team's entirely white, there's something going on there, good people. There's something about who gets heard. You know, if you have a culture where some people's voices allow loud than others, or some people get more airtime than others, then there's something going on there. You know, if people, one of the things I come across a lot actually is organizations who are saying, well, we're trying to do something about this, and when we try and collect monitoring data, people don't want to share their data with us. And I can think, wonder why. You know, is that an indication that something's going on, that people don't feel psychologically safe enough to share that data? You know, if you're struggling to innovate, if you've got repetitive patterns of thinking and doing things in your organization, if you don't know how power works in your organization, they're all ways in which unconscious that you might want to at least ask yourself the question, are biases at play in the way we're running an organization? So I'm going to stop there and put my camera back on so you can see me. So oh, there we go. The camera's working, hurrah. So I've kind of given you some of my thoughts about why I think equality, diversity matters and why you should bother. You are fully welcome to disagree with me. That's joyful. We like a bit of debate. But yeah, over to you and your questions and comments, and over to Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, completely insightful, and kind of demonstrates to me the challenges of businesses we all face. There's a mountain to be climbed there, but the recognition that it's not right, and the recognition that actually, for both financial reasons as well as moral reasons, we need to make these changes. One of the slides that caught my eye was when you were talking about the language, and you were talking about how people respond, and the need for people not to be afraid to get it wrong. Let's be honest about it. I mean, there's a generational thing going on here, and it's when it comes to D&I in particular, we think about, you know, the development of what I call wokeism. There is some degree of joining in the middle, but equally too, there are extremes here. So, you know, some of the things that perhaps some of the younger generations are basically focused on at the moment, as older generations, we might feel challenged around it. Equally too, some of the activities that you're reporting just seem obvious to us. You've got to do it. You know, how do you make inclusivity? How do you actually make sure that you welcome people to your organizations and give them the power? Because that's really ultimately how anything's going to change. So I put a little notes in the chat box saying, look, this is a safe environment. If people feel comfortable in asking questions and don't want to feel foolish or worried about actually having a misunderstanding based upon their own common prejudices, or perhaps not even that, maybe that's how they've grown up and the environments in which they have come from, they just don't have this level of awareness, and as you say, are carrying that unconscious bias. So is anyone happy to kind of kick off the questions here, please? There was a question from Jeremy, I believe. Jeremy? Is Jezza gone?
Hi, yes, hello, yep. Sorry, Steve, what was that? You wanted to ask the question?
Yeah,
I was really fascinated looking at the data, and you were saying that looking at the McKinsey report, and it was, one of the points made was that businesses are finding they can't win business because clients are asking them to have sufficient D&I presence. So there's a very hard commercial reason why businesses will do it, which is less than being sort of caring necessarily, but then looking at the balance sheet. Looking at looking at the data, is there evidence that suggests that the most successful companies are successful because of D&I measures, or is it simply the case that the most progressive companies, the most innovative companies, are just first to see the commercial advantage in doing it?
So the first bit of that question, is there evidence which directly connects diversity with business success?
Yeah.
A ton of it. If I had 2 days, I could probably walk you through all of that data, a ton of it. In terms of whether the second point that you asked about, are there, I may not have heard the question correctly, so tell me if I'm answering the right question.
It's just a case of whether it's just a case of it's the successful companies that would be first to take D&I measures because they're successful and progressive and innovative. So it may be their success isn't because of their D&I measures, it's because they're progressive companies.
Got you. That I haven't seen any data on. What I have seen data on is, so I don't know is my honest answer. What I have seen data on is that there's like a growing divide. So there are companies that are absolutely embracing equality, diversity and inclusion openly, genuinely, not pretending it because it's a marketing tool. Look at us, we're doing this, but genuinely engaging with it. And there's a bunch of companies who are just determinedly not engaging with it. And so there is a bit of a divide in that sense. That I've seen data on, but your specific question I haven't seen data on.
Okay, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Question from Jay.
Hiya, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I really love the focus on benefits to the organisation. They're very compelling, and stats that I've used, similar stats that I've used around female leadership before. So I really like that. I know you run an agency that does this, but I wondered, for those of us in smaller startups or agencies, are there any resources that you can recommend in terms of sort of materials or exercises, or even you've mentioned tests, that we can do to try and, you know, whilst it's fine to say to people this is important and that's what those stats do, what do we do then to try and make sure that we're actively trying to solve it?
Very, very sensible question. Before I give you a couple of quite helpful resources which might help, one of the things I always say to clients is you really need to match your ambition on this topic to the available resources you have. If you were commissioning an IT infrastructure project and you had £50,000, you wouldn't create a spec or a set of goals that you would need £1 million to implement. EDI is no different. And I always say, if you have £2.50 and half an hour at the end of the week, no problem, just match what you're trying to achieve with those resources. So in terms of the unconscious bias stuff, you probably will have come across it, but I'm personally a fan of the Harvard implicit association tests. So for those of you that haven't come across them, Harvard do, and they're free, so anybody can do them. You can access them and anyone can use them. And what the Harvard implicit association tests do is they've got, I think it's about 12 or 14, and they're different dimensions of different. So there's gender, there's physical disability, there's it's an American thing, so it tends to be skin color rather than race. But they've also got things like weight and age, because people do discriminate against people on the basis of those things as well. So I think the first step is really understanding, are there any biases in how we're thinking about things that might be getting in the way that we don't really know about? And that's free. It just, I think each test takes about 20 minutes to do, so it's as many tests as you want to do. The other thing is, go onto my website, because there is a free resource there which you can download, which is in the resources section, called the Inclusive Leadership Framework. And that's a framework which can be used with leaders, but it's also a framework that I've used in trying to identify cultural attributes. So I use that framework with clients in a number of different ways. I use it to try and assess where they are on those dimensions and those attributes of inclusion. Some of you are market research companies. I'm sure you can create some kind of market research tool using that framework. Please credit me if you do use it, but you know, you can do that to kind of understand where you're currently doing. What I also do is use that as the basis of narrowing down what particular, in two ways, what particular attributes of inclusion are most relevant to our organization's success, so that you can use it and use it for that. The other thing, way I use it is you can't be trained in inclusion in one go, and let's have half-day training and we'll all be fine. Don't think so. So I use it as a way of really honing in on the particular attributes that maybe some clients really want to get good at, and developing a coaching and development program on the basis of that. And you could do that as well. You could at least identify where you need to get going. Does that help, Jay?
That's really valuable. Thank you ever so much.
Question here, which I think we've all at some point wrestled with, and that's the concept of positive discrimination as a means of creating a more diverse workforce. A lot of organisations, particularly public companies at the moment, are effectively, you know, saying that they will positively discriminate in situations where there are 5, 6, 7 candidates from someone from a diverse or ethnic background. What's your view on that?
Okay, so I have two views on that. Oh, I'm echoes of myself there. So for anybody watching the recording, I do apologize. I have two views on that. One of the huge challenges around equality, diversity and inclusion work is loads of people make loads of assumptions and they don't even know they're making the assumptions. And you then work with them, and you must feel this in the work that you do with clients, and you work with them and you think, oh my God, there's about 10 assumptions they're making in that one sentence, none of which I can see any data for. And there is an assumption under when people talk about positive discrimination. And the assumption is that somehow you have to lower the bar, because these people who look like me, or gay people, or women, if you're in a male-dominated organisation, there's something wrong with them. And therefore what we've got to do is we've got to lower the bar, we've got to lower the bar so we give them a better chance of coming in. I am here to tell you, if you are black, brown, a woman and gay, there is nothing wrong with you. You are not the problem. The problem is that organisations put in place, often without recognising it, barriers to people with different forms of difference, barriers in the way of them joining your organisation. So my point number one is, there's nothing wrong with us. Please believe me, there is nothing wrong with us. It's not us that need fixing. With the greatest of respect, it's the organisations that need fixing. Point number two is, if you've got a situation where you've got equally, you've done that getting rid of the barrier stuff. I say that glibly, it's hard to do. You've done that getting rid of the barrier stuff. You've interviewed 5 people, 2 of them are people of colour. They're equally brilliant. In all situations, what you have is candidates bring different things, don't you? That's the nature of recruitment. My personal view is, if you're already very white, taking that example, and you want to get the benefits of diversity, why would you not go for the person of colour if they're actually equally as good? Why would you not? Because if one of your goals is increasing diversity, it could be gender, it could be, as I say, sexuality, it could be disability, whatever it is, why would you not? Because why would you deny yourself the benefits that we've just touched the surface of today? Oh, you're on mute, Stephen.
2 years doing this, you never know, will you? Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive answer. I'm going to ask Michael to come into the conversation. Michael, many years was a professional football player, and we've seen in the world of football how there has been an evolution, but we still have massive issues within soccer. I don't know whether, Michael, I don't know whether your question related to that or more broadly.
No, it didn't, but I can touch on it, because I mean, it's been interesting. Just so that you know, like Srabani, I mean, I'm who you're talking about, okay? Because ultimately, I'm 61 years old, and I came from a working class background when there wasn't when we as black people, brown people, weren't visible in the middle class. And so I'm going to say this in 2 ways. First of all, one of the reasons why it makes commercial sense is because there is now a genuine ethnic middle class. Okay, that's massive. And that is why companies need to take notice. It means that talent can come from there. But when back in the 60s, when I was born in 1960, we were very much working class communities. So we didn't have the kind of visibility that we have now. But some of those, as the generations move on, things start to dilute. But that hasn't happened fully. I spent the weekend this weekend, strangely enough, coaching an England veterans team down in Weston-super-Mare, and I was the only black person in that vicinity that I came into. And there was still, in certain places that I went to, there was still, a little bit of surprise. I can tell you, as I'm going through, as when I was getting employed, and I'm in the marketing field as well, I would send in my CV, And I've had a situation whereby I'm the only person in the lift. I'm going up to the lift and I'm met at the door by the person and they're going, oh, no, not waiting for you. And I went, are you waiting for Michael Adams? And I said, yeah, so that's me. And those things in societies that aren't, in the cities, we don't see this because we are exposed to each other, we move. But when you go out into the shires, it still exists and it's still there. And that's because their version of me is stereotypical. It's not gauged through experience, it's gauged through what they've read or what they've heard, and they hang on to that. And so they think they know you. Now, the second part, which I think Srabani made a great effort, is the one thing that we as people of an ethnic background is, do not treat us as a project. We are human beings. We're not numbers. Do not do it. It's patronizing. We see it. And that's why you won't get the information from us, because we are looked upon as a project. I've said my bit.
I'm going to steal that, Michael. Is that all right? Don't
Say
treat
that
it as
again.
a project. I'm going to
Oh,
steal
yeah.
that, Michael.
Steal away. No, and it is something. I mean, and it actually, interestingly enough, and I can see Paul's in there, Paul Hackett. Hi, Paul. Back in the agency days, when I was doing the agency rounds, I remember that I was a graphic consultant and going around to the mainstream agencies, and I was a novelty. I became somebody who went, oh, you've got to deal with the black guy from Conway's. He's a laugh and blah, 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 blah. And I use that to my advantage. You know, it got me in through the door where other people couldn't get through the door. I went, okay, then I can do that. I can play that role. Now, I remember, strangely, you showing the Dove advert. I remember an advert back in the day then when Saatchi's had done it, and it was about a sun lotion. And they cleverly did, what they did is that this person started off white, and in the end, when they've applied the sun lotion, their accent turned to a Caribbean accent. They went the other way, and it was very funny campaign. Do you remember that, Paul? It was a very, very funny campaign, and it was done brilliantly in that way. And they used humor to take it. So it's not, it's, oh, right, you're going to get brown, but it's going to change your accent as well. Now, that's completely opposite to what Dove did. It was clever, but
it's just as crass, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But it's and I'm saying that we are there, sitting there as black people, as brown people, watching all this. You know, we're seeing all this, and this is our lived experience. And that's why I say, don't treat us as a project. We won't respond to it. We won't. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much to Srabani too, and all of you for coming today. Sadly, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up the session now because I know you've got other meetings to go to. I just wanted to take another shout out really, and that was to say, just for those that next week we'll be hosting and actually sponsoring the Visual Media Conference. So next week's event at 11 AM will actually be on the Hopin platform, not on Zoom. We'll send out details of how to get onto that platform. The Visual Media Conference this year, its theme is about sustainability through innovation. We're going to be running a number of sessions, and a number of Pimento members will be on the 2-day conference bill, and they're going to be presenting. We're going to see from a really interesting organisation, Do Good UK, and they're an ethical investment company, completely focused on sustainability. They've just launched recently, and 3 or 4 Pimento members are very actively involved in that particular project. So we'll actually get the opportunity to have a look at what they're doing in that space. This is something we're going to come back to, you know, almost on a weekly basis. I think, Michael, it's not a project. It's actually a need for change, and I think organisations need to be able to actually, you know, embrace, understand, and act. And in a few weeks' time, we're going to hear from our HR business, Reality HR. We'll be talking about actually one of the things that we touched on earlier on, which is actually the measurement of change. How do we consciously, in an unconscious bias world, measure change over time something that Annabelle too, I'd love to have a chat with you about. So great session, really enjoyed the interplay, and thank you very much indeed. Have a great D&I day and enjoy yourselves, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.